Hello again, everyone. Varel here, Flo out of Portland, and we've got a little bit of a frequently asked question mini-series here going. And question number 14 here is, can gutters cause roof leaks or structural damage? Yes and no. In the Northwest, we don't get this nearly as often. It's called an ice dam. An ice dam is when water or ice melts up the roof line and then leaks into the house as the heat escapes. And it's oftentimes relating to poor ventilation, because if that heat was removed properly or humidity was removed properly, then at that point, then maybe the ice wouldn't be melting and you wouldn't have that issue. It's not just because of that, but if your gutters are clogged and you don't maintain them properly, in those situations, you can also have an ice dam that climbs up the roof line and it's going to create a leak inside the house. But structural issues are going to be focused at just the eave, the rafter tails, not typically further up the roof line, just because of gutters. So that's the short answer. From any experience that I've seen with relating to gutters causing roof leaks, it's very rare. You don't see gutters relating to roof leaks directly, but an overflowing clogged gutter can definitely create rafter tail issues. And in Portland, Northeast, Southeast, you don't see it as often, but they're out there. These 100-year-old buildings will have decorative rafter tails, where a dude carved out a really nice design at the end of the tail to let the gutter sit on top of, and then the gutter is spiked in typically, and it's a smaller gutter. It's like a 4-inch. They don't want to have that rafter carrying a bunch of weight. But back then, maybe the guy that had the 4K machine had the best team, and he got a bunch of 4Ks on there. Maybe he knew the most amount of builders. These gutter guys going around town saying, "Hey, Mr. Builder, I got a 4K gutter here. You should build us some pretty rafter tails. Bob down the road did it. You want to do it? I'll give you a quote." I'm sure that was kind of a conversation, the vibe back then. Was a who you know situation, because there's only a limited amount of people in a situation where town's starting to grow up for the people that actually know how to build the houses like that. And so structural damage, though, is not necessarily going to be the only cause. I will say there are other situations as well, that if you have a newer house that is not necessarily the gutters, but it's the downspout. So on a 2-story that has a downspout that drains to the lower story, we've started to do this now where we add ice and water underneath that downspout, because what will happen is, in a freezing situation, that water is gushing out, and typically that will contribute to an ice dam related area that is not the eave. And so if you don't properly put your underlayments around those downspouts, you can run into these issues. And we've seen it before where then people choose to do a downspout extension, which they're kind of ugly. You can't necessarily get them to match perfectly. In the commercial side, we've seen people do kind of like a runoff tray that extends down the roof instead of doing a downspout. They look architecturally fine. They're a little more modern to the building, but the point is to protect the roof from the downspout runoff that's coming from the gutters, because people typically don't think that that's going to necessarily be a problem until they open up the roof and do a replacement. And that area can have a sheet or two or more, depending on the size, of plywood associated with it. And if you do have this issue, or if you're seeing this on your building, it's typically going to be that you can see a little bit of a dip underneath that downspout as that first story transitions up to the downspout. And you want to be prepared to make that repair, but then do it right after the repair is complete. A couple sheets of plywood, no big deal if you're already going to be considering a roof replacement, but I'll make sure that that problem doesn't happen again, because we treat all of our clients like investors. I assume that everyone's an engineer. I like to over-explain things, and I like good questions. And so when these areas are being addressed, and I'm looking in there around the downspout areas it's transitioning, I'm typically pointing up there saying, hey, it looks okay, but just from what I've seen in the past, like, this is what you want to be thinking about just in case. Now, that's not necessarily a structural issue. Very rarely is that the case. I've never seen a downspout contributing to that area having a leak and it being a structural issue. It's going to be just a couple sheets of plywood. I can imagine if it was neglected for 50 to 100 years that maybe that rafter is rotted at the top where the plywood meets, as the leak potentially could go and run down the rafter and all the way down to the eave at that point. So, but leak gutter and structural issues, pretty rare. Not going to see it very often. Those are the extreme examples I could think of, at least for what I've seen out in the field. There's all sorts of approaches in Portland. There's been literally 150 years worth of people DIYing repairs, and then people that come in during the Oregon Trail movement, that actually have woodworking skills. Not everyone thinks that they need to measure twice, cut once, we'll say. And so there's been a variety of solutions out here in Portland. We have seen quite a bit of approaches that then we have to go and then fix properly. So that is what I believe, gutters and structural issues. That's about as much as I can go into there. So we'll move on to the next one. Ciao.